Lord, in this season when we rejoice, Father, may we always remember that you reign in our hearts, Lord, in our lives, in our circumstances, Father. Now, Lord, as I begin to share from Esther, Lord, I just pray that it would be your words that come forth, Father, in Jesus' name. Amen. Hey, Lindsay, the backup music's still playing. All right. So, an aging king woke up one day, acutely aware of his own mortality. He had no son, and his was a culture where only a male heir could take his place. He decided that he would adopt a son, and then he could take his place. But he insisted that such an adopted son must be extraordinary in every sense of the word. He considered each of his advisors and relatives in turn, but found all of them wanting. So he launched a competition in his kingdom open to all boys, no matter what their background. 10 boys made it to the very top. There was little to separate these boys in terms of intelligence and physical attributes and capabilities. The king said to them, I have one last test, and whoever comes out on top will become my adopted son and heir to my throne. Then he said, this kingdom depends solely on agriculture, so the king must know how to cultivate plants. Here are 7 seeds of grain for each of you. Take them home, plant them and nurture them for 6 weeks. At the end of 6 weeks, we shall see who has done the best job of cultivating the grain. And that person will be my son and my heir. The boys took their seeds and hurried home. Each got a pot, prepared the soil, and sowed his seeds. There was much excitement in the kingdom as the people waited to see who was destined to be their next king. In one home, the boy and his parents were almost heartbroken when the days stretched into weeks and the seeds had failed to sprout. The boy did not know what had gone wrong. He had selected the soil carefully. He had applied the right quantity and type of fertilizer. He had been very dutiful in watering it at the right intervals. He had even prayed over it day and night, and yet his seeds had turned out to be unproductive. I understand his feeling. That happens to everything alive in my home that's green. Some of his friends advised him to go and buy seed from the market and plant that. After all, they said, how can anyone tell seeds of grain one from another? But his parents, who had always taught him the value of integrity, reminded him that if the king wanted them to plant just any grain, he would have asked them to go for their own seed. If you take anything different from what the king gave you, that would be dishonest. Maybe we are not destined for the throne. If so, let it be. But don't be found to have deceived the king, they told him. The appointed day came, and the boys returned to the palace, each of them proudly exhibiting a pot of healthy seedlings. It was obvious that the other 9 boys had had great success with their seeds. The king began making his way down the line of eager boys and asked each of them, is this what came of the seeds that I gave you? And each boy responded, yes, your majesty. And the king would nod and move on down the line. The king finally got to the last boy in the lineup. The boy was shaking. He feared that the king might have him thrown into prison for wasting his seeds. What did you do with the seeds that I gave you? The king asked. I planted them and I cared for them diligently, your majesty. But alas, they failed to sprout, the boy said. He hung his head in shame, and the crowd of other boys jeered. But the king raised his hands in signal for silence. Then he said, my people, behold your next king. The people were confused. Why that one, many asked. How can he be the right choice? The king took his place on his throne with the boy by his side and said, I gave these boys boiled seeds. This test was not for cultivating grain. It was a test of character, a test of integrity. It was the ultimate test. If a king must have one quality, it must be that he should be above dishonesty. Only this boy has passed the test, because a boiled seed cannot sprout. Today, as we move into Esther, we're going to see what integrity does for us. We're going to see how it resonates amongst everybody around us in our circle, in our spheres and everything, and how important it is and how it can change lives. And so I want you guys to know it's funny because you may not know this, but this is now my celebration of my 4th year of being the teaching director at Community Bible Study. 4 years ago, yes, thank you. 4 years ago, I was going to training to be trained to be in this position. I'd been the ATD, the Associate Teaching Director, for several years, and the Lord just worked it out. That's a whole nother story. But I went to training, and one of the things that we did at training was we had to prepare as if we were going to do a wrap-up. So we had to write out our outline, had to come up with our central idea and what our key verse would be, and then we had an actual workshop where we went over these. Well, me being me, when I go into situations like that, I'm usually pretty proud of my work if it's done. So when it's done, I'm going to take the opportunity to share if I can, and sure enough, we were studying Esther for that particular thing that we did. Remember this? And so one of the ladies, or the lady that led the workshop, her name is Joan Del Brock. If you ever go and look at Community Bible Study stuff and look through any of it, you'll find Joan Del Brock. She is a very elegant, put together, intimidating woman. She is just one of those people that she made me nervous, but she was leading our workshop. But I so wanted to impress her with what I had brought. And so in the workshop, we were asked to share our central ideas. I tried to find it because I really wanted to look back and give you guys a laugh, because there was no telling what it was, but I couldn't find it. I could find my first book that I took, but I couldn't find where I'd done that. Well, so I share it in our little workshop group, and Joan Dell's like, and I'm like, okay, so now's the praise time. You did great. Way to do that. You're going to be a great teaching director. I can't wait to hear what comes out of you in 5 years. But it was meant to be a teaching moment, so understand that. And she said, well, here's the thing. You've always got to be teaching from the place of assuming that the people you're speaking to have only read up to the point where the lesson ends. You cannot ever assume that they've gone beyond that or that they know the story. And with Esther, it's so easy to say, well, you know the story. I feel like everybody has heard for such a time as this, except that everybody hasn't heard that. So in front of all of the training teaching directors and associate teaching directors, I got to experience what it felt like when Joan Dell was like, good try, but not a good bingo. And she was very kind, but when we go back to Esther, it always makes me remember that moment of what I felt like when she was like, yeah, you shouldn't have done that way. So today I'm going to work really hard to stay within the context of what we have studied. So if I go beyond it, please come tell me afterwards, Jennifer, you went beyond it. You didn't stay where we were supposed to. So today we start one of my favorite books in the Bible, which is Esther, which is probably why I was so excited in that workshop, is because I love Esther. Esther is sometimes said to portray Jesus Christ as our advocate. We see this book written in the form of a short story, very similar to that of Ruth, with its setting in the place or in the palace at Susa. We see in Esther the Jewish community living in exile in the Persian Empire, and if you remember our timeline, basically what's happened is we have gotten the first group of exiles have gone back to Jerusalem. They're working on the temple. These are ones that stayed behind. These are ones that didn't go when they could have. And so this is set in this Persian Empire. And interestingly enough, the word God never appears in the book of Esther. Yet every page we read is full of God. I loved what Patty Marquis said a few weeks ago in her opening. She talked about God is aware of us long before we are ever aware of him. And we see that lived out in this story of Esther. This is the God that we see written about. From parallel passages written by the Greek historian Herodotus, something like that. Herod Otus. That's who it's written by. He's a Greek historian. We find that this feast that we're reading about in this first chapter of Esther was the occasion for planning the campaign against Greece. And you have to realize that at this time, the Persian Empire was pretty much the largest in the world. And this king is preparing to now try to conquer Greece, to add to his spoils, to add to it. And so they think that the reason maybe why this went 6 months is because they're planning, they're strategizing, they're putting together what they're going to do when they actually attack. And we find that, the campaign that when they attacked, it actually failed. He did not defeat Greece. When this story was written, and who its author is are not exactly known. It's not known for certain. It's generally believed that it happened between the events described in chapters 6 and 7 of Ezra. And if you remember back, you can look back in your lessons and see where we've already done some of Ezra. Now we're kind of scooting back into a timeline of between that 6 and 7 before Ezra takes another group of settlers. So about 50,000, remember, have gone on to Jerusalem, and the rest have stayed behind. So much of what you read in studying the book of Esther talks about God's providential care for his people. And I do believe that God is always longing to provide for us. We're told in 1 Corinthians 10 that God will always provide a way of escape. So as we look at the book of Esther, what if, and this is just me, okay, let me put this in my parentheses of this is just me thinking and saying, you know, we're all speculating about a whole lot of this. A whole lot of your lesson, the questions that are asked are our personal speculations from what we read in the Word, from what we know about the character of God, and from what we know based on what we see in Esther's character, Mordecai's character, and the king. I'm calling him King Xerxes because that's easier than his A name. So just know when I say King Xerxes, that's who I'm talking about. What if, when King Cyrus said, you guys can go home, go back and rebuild that temple, what if all of them had gone? What if there had not been any of the exiles left in Babylon, in Persia, to need to be saved? What if that had happened? This could have been a completely different story. There may have never been an Esther, but God who knows how to write the best stories says, you know what? I've got a plan for your plan. We don't know why Esther and her family didn't go home. We just know that they didn't. And maybe it doesn't matter, but I think it's important to recognize that Esther and Mordecai are where they are because they made a decision. They made a decision to stay somewhere. But God was still working in the midst of it. God is moving. And God will turn situations that were literally meant to destroy them. He will turn them for their good. He will use any of us who are willing. He will use any situation we find ourselves in to turn it for our good. Anytime we choose godliness in the midst of godlessness, he will turn that situation for our good. So as the book opens, we see the king entertaining all of the nobles and princes of his kingdom in the royal palace at Susa. And you can just imagine it. And I love the description it gives of where they are. It tells you what the floor looks like. It tells you what the couches look like. I mean, it tells you what the goblets look like. They're gold. This is meant to show us how extravagant this whole thing was. Susa was the winter residence for Persian kings, and if you look up what it actually looked like and stuff, they have found and excavated remnants of it. It took up about 2.5 acres for this palace. This was the winter palace. That's what my winter home looks like too. It's about 2.5 acres. And so this is where they are, and they're celebrating, and they're having a party, and the king is showing off how rich he is. And he's been doing this for about 6 months. They've been planning and strategizing, but now they're in the tail end of this, and they're having a 7-day feast, which is basically a drunken revelry that has gotten to an all-time high. Because what we see here is we see a king call for his queen, Queen Vashti, who refuses to come. And some of the background of that, some of the cultural things is that, number one, a king would normally never ever, it's not within etiquette for him to call for his queen to come. All right, so he's stepping outside of what a king would normally do, probably because he's inebriated. All right, he's probably not thinking amongst, with all cylinders firing. And it's speculated that a bunch of guys hanging out there drunk, they're talking about who has the most beautiful women, and he's got to prove. And you know what? You can imagine this because of the fact that the description of how much he's tried to show how rich he was and how extravagant he could be and how he would treat his guests. And we can call that generosity, we can call that extravagance, whichever way you want to go. But anyway, he calls for Queen Vashti. That's what we do know for fact. She refuses. That's what we do know for fact. Speculation is that she was expected to come in the nude. All right, that would have been a completely different situation. And apparently, she found the option of possibly having, death to be preferable to coming into a group of drunken revelry of men who would do no telling what to her. So it is pretty much understood that no Persian woman would permit this because it would be considered an affront to her womanhood. His very request was an affront to who she was. Who is Vashti? She's the daughter of Belshazzar, which if you remember, we learned about him in Daniel. He's the king that dies right there from the writing on the wall that happens. She's also the great-granddaughter of Nebuchadnezzar. You remember Nebuchadnezzar? He did some pretty rough things too. He's the one that destroyed the temple, the first temple. And it's said that one night after her father died, she went to his room and she didn't realize he was dead. Belshazzar had passed on. And she was taken captive by King Darius. But King Darius felt sorry for her, so he gave her to his son, King Xerxes, as a wife. So it kind of helps to kind of see some background to Queen Vashti because, you can look at her and be like, well, she was just being pretty rebellious. She should have come, and that was expected of her. And, yes, it probably was. But you can also understand that she was still a person. She was still somebody who had had a story, who had a background. And so in the midst of all of this, she refuses. We know that the king then asks for, help from his wise people around him, and they tell him, they give him the stuff to say that says, you know what, let's just get rid of her, because if you allow her to do this, everybody's going to start acting like all the wives will act like this. Now let me just put a little pause in here and say, do we see this happening all the time now? Do we see on social media where one little thing happens and all of a sudden it is a circus of events of this is going to happen all over the place now? One thing happening. And so I felt like this was a good moment to step back and say, you know what, let's not create a crisis. Let's not create chaos. Because you know what, we're called to live godly in the midst of godlessness. That's our calling. That's who we've been designed to be. Christ in us is more than enough for what we need, for how to walk this out in every situation. So guys, don't create chaos. Don't create circus. Have you ever got that person in your family that everything is an emergency? We forgot our shoes. It's an emergency. Our family pictures are going to be horrible because he's not going to have shoes on. We'll never have great family pictures again, and it'll be on my wall forever. These are the kind of emergencies that happen in my family. All right, so you guys are we're definitely doing this at the 9:30 time because I'm working hard to get you guys to smile, and you guys are kind of like looking at me. So let me just turn this around and tell you what I'm seeing. Smile, everybody. Yes, we're getting through it. All right, so between chapters 1 and 2 is when this whole thing with Greece, this whole battle with Greece, is supposed to have happened. And he went in with 5 million men and still suffered defeat. So it says that 2 years later, basically, he married Esther and made her his queen. Esther was queen for around 13 years. She no doubt lived through many of the years when her stepson was reigning, which is King Artaxerxes. I'm just making up these names. I mean, they're real names, but I'm just making up how to say them. And if you remember King Artaxerxes, it was under this king that Nehemiah, who we're going to study after Esther, was able to rebuild Jerusalem. So these names, I know they're hard to say, but these names are really important because we see what God is doing as he's weaving his love story throughout all of this. So Esther's called. She's probably around 14. And I know that every one of us, no matter how much tragedy we have experienced in our life, there's not one person sitting under the sound of my voice has ever had anybody come and knock on their door and say, today, your 14-year-old daughter goes with us. She's going to go. She's going to be prepared for the king. You may never see her again. You'll probably have no idea what it's going to be like for her. You'll probably have no idea whether she will be the one until it's announced for all the kingdom to know. And I want you to know that she has 399 other contenders that are being taken in this same group. None of us have ever experienced that. None of us can say, I know what it would feel like to have that happen. Any of you mothers out there with daughters, any of you that are 14 or even just a little bit older, can you imagine being taken from your home? Even though you'd lost your parents, you still had Mordecai, who was at least a family member, who was raising her as his very own, who was caring for her, who was walking her through what it looked like to be a Jewish young lady. And in one moment, her entire life was changed. She didn't know in that moment what this meant. She didn't know in that moment what this was going to look like down the road. And I'm going to tell every one of you, as you're staring at your lives, as you're looking at your situations, as you're looking at the things you're facing, you have no idea what God is still weaving in your love story. You have no idea what one moment of choosing godliness in the midst of godlessness can do in your entire situation, in your entire surroundings. So don't downplay what you're walking through saying, well, you know what, I'm not Esther. Well, no, you're not Esther. Thank the Lord. You know, that's a good thing, because she walked a hard thing in doing this. Words that I read described her: reserved, modest, quiet, humble, self-controlled. Don't we read about these in the New Testament? Not adjectives that usually conjure up images of a heroine. They don't seem to describe the type of person who would put her life on the line for others. To be a public figure, a political entity, and a person of control and power. But they are. Esther, a girl whose body, mind, soul, and actions affected reality and changed the world. And I'm going to tell you something. We have choices to make in every situation. And I don't want to diminish what Esther and Mordecai did. I don't want to diminish the choices that they made. You know, if I were to leave here right now and I said, okay, I need to go from this church, First Baptist Church, to Nashville, depending on who out there drove me, we might go a different way. Some of you don't like I-40, so we're definitely not going to get on I-40 and go what I consider to be the quickest way. Unless there's a wreck, then it slows us down, doesn't it? Some of you would take other roads. Some of you would take other ways. I don't actually know other ways to Nashville without my GPS, so I really should have probably looked those things up if I was going to talk about this. But what I'm saying to you is, whoever's driving the car will pick the route. We're told, I set before you life and death. Now choose life, which tells me that God gives us choices in the ways that we want to go. Will I choose life or will I choose death? Because I do, and I don't want to make it seem like we get to drive the car and we're not depending on God. I just don't want to diminish the fact that Esther and Mordecai had to make choices for life every step of the way when he gave her over, knowing that he really didn't have a choice. I mean, like if somebody came to your door and said they wanted your daughter, right now, we still live in a country where there's choices, where we have freedoms. He didn't have a choice. What did he feel like that first night when he knew she was gone? How did he sleep? What was he praying when he was talking to the Lord? How did that feel? The days that he would walk in front of the kingdom, in front of the castle, when he would walk, what was he doing? What was he praying? How was he dealing with this? Esther, what was her first night like? What was that first morning like when all of a sudden she's in this room with all of these other girls, and yes, they're going to be pampered and they're going to be fed well and they're going to get all of these things, but what was it like? Because I think sometimes we read these stories and we hit the high points of for such a time as this. Yes, for such a time as this, but we have to remember that she was a real person. She was a real girl that woke up on that first morning and had to decide, how will I face this? What will I do? Will I choose life? Will I choose death? Will I choose godliness? Will I choose my own way? Will I decide what this looks like and decide that my life is now over and I can never have anything good happen to me because I've been taken away from the only family member I knew, and I've been put in this situation that is horrible. She's going to be put before a king as a virgin to spend the night with him, and we have no idea what that night entails. She had to choose. Don't diminish. Yes, God is always interweaving his beautiful plan and his love story. But we still have to make choices in the midst of that because we're still given the right to drive the car a little bit. We get to choose the route. He's a good God. And I have to believe that both Mordecai and Esther recognized who he was. They recognized his character. And they recognized that in Psalm 91, David says, "He who dwells in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty." He who chooses to dwell in the secret place of the Most High will abide. Abide means to stay. It doesn't mean that you just visit. It means you stay in that place. And I think Esther and Mordecai both had to figure out what that secret place looked like. If they hadn't figured it out before now, they were figuring out on the fly what that secret place felt like. The secret place means to be hidden or to be concealed. Don't you think that Esther, probably as she was walking around, had to feel like, "Lord, I need you to conceal me right now. I need you to cover me like a shield. I need your strength. I need you to lift me up." And I'm going to tell you something. We were given examples in our lesson today of Esther and Daniel and Joseph, and I can't remember if there were any others that were given. But every one of them, when you read their story, they were men and women of integrity. Don't diminish the choices that they made. Don't diminish the choice for life, the choice for godliness, the choice that they said, "God, I will live in that secret place and I will follow you wherever you lead. And Lord, I will trust that although right now what I see doesn't look like what I think it should, that this doesn't look like the life I chose, this doesn't look like the life I wanted to live, this doesn't look like the life that will make me happy. You say you'll give me the desires of my heart." Well, I'm just going to tell you, when I'm taken into a harem and told I'm going to go before the king as a virgin, and then I'm going to be put back in with a whole bunch of other women, and I don't know what it's going to be like, I'm telling you, that's not looking like the life of my dreams. That's not looking like what I think the way life should be laid out as. Fill in the blanks. Or make yourself feel better about the fact that you're not in a harem today. Okay? There's you some good news. You're not part of a harem. That's really good news because she was. So the secret place means to be hidden or to be concealed. Taking it all the way back to the Hebrew, which you know I've been really loving to do this year, it's like a circle that represents being concealed, protected, and covered over by God. Based on the scriptures that we can find that talk about intimacy with God, we can see that this secret place is like a place where one takes their lover to share a secret that is for them only, for no one else to hear. Do you remember being in elementary school, and do you remember deciding who you thought your best friend was going to be, and when you guys would get together and you would share secrets, and it would be like, "Only my best friend knows"? Or even now as an adult, when you're like in a group of people and you have that special friend that they have all the backstory and they know, you guys have all of the stories that go all the way back all the years. And so you share that. And so it's like, we've got our own private joke. Or with your husband. There are things that Jim Johnson knows about me that no one else will ever know. Not because because I tell people everything pretty much. But because there are things that are said between us, because he's the one whom my heart loves and whom my heart adores. In this place, in this secret place, we share secrets. And in that secret place with the Lord, and I talked about it a little bit last week, when we talked about fasting, but this is even a different thing. This is like being in that secret place with Him, like when we're studying His Word, or when we're praying, or when we're doing our devotion, whatever you want to call it. And He shares His secrets, and God shares His plans for the one who has stolen his heart with love. Do you realize that you are the one whom He adores? Do you realize that the King is enthralled with your beauty? Do you realize that as you stand before Him, clean in what Jesus did, that He smiles upon you and He says, "That's my girl," or "That's my guy. I have a plan for you. I've got good things in store for you. I've got good things going on." But too many times we look out here and we see all of this stuff happening and we're like, well, this doesn't look like what on my internal, what I'm talking to myself about. It doesn't look like what I think would make for a good plan, God. But then when you get in that secret place and all of a sudden he says, oh, Jennifer, I trust you. I trust you with my word to stand up there before those women and young men. I trust you to share it. I trust you to hear my voice. I trust you to say what I'm telling you to say. And all of a sudden, in that secret place, he says the things that our heart needs to hear. And you know what? In your secret place, you're hearing what your heart needs to hear. And Esther and Mordecai in that secret place heard what their hearts needed to hear to walk this out. They heard what they needed to hear to be able to handle the things that they were facing. Our lover speaks to us. God speaks to us about what he longs to give us. He assures us of his protection. The secret place is a heart-to-heart connection only shared by those who love one another deeply, openly, and honestly. That secret place, that's the place where we get real. That's the place where we say, you know what, God, I'm not really feeling some of this right now. God, I'm scared about some of this. God, this doesn't look like what I wanted. God, I don't want to be the king's wife. I don't want to be the queen. I don't want to go through 12 months of preparing for this. God, I don't want my kids to do things this way. I don't want this to happen to that child. I don't want to have to walk this out with that friend. But when we get in that secret place and we share openly and deeply and honestly, our lover comes to us and he says, oh, I've given you all things that pertain to life and godliness. I've called you to do the things that I've called you to do, but I've empowered you. I'm not calling you to do it on your own. I'm walking it out with you. I want to be a part of it with you. It's a picture of reciprocal love that God desires with every one of us because of who he is, because of his character, because of how he feels about us. God is always attempting to connect with us deeply and personally. And I'm telling you, if you leave here with nothing else about Esther, leave here knowing that the same God that connected with her, the same God that gave Mordecai exactly what he needed to walk it out, longs to connect with each of you in that secret place to tell you exactly what would do your heart good, what will give you the strength to walk it out, what will give you the courage to take steps that may not be culturally accepted, that may not in your circle of friends look good, that may not on Facebook look like you're doing it all right. But in that secret place, he shares his heart with us, and he gives us wisdom to handle our current dilemmas. You know what? I end up in a lot of dilemmas. Do you end up in some dilemmas? And they're dilemmas because of choices I made a lot of times. They're dilemmas because I was just ignorant in what I just thought something else was going to make me happy, and so I went that way. And I thought that, it was a good idea right before Christmas to spend $300 on 2 new outfits. I didn't do that this year. I've come a long way, guys. But I did that one year, and then I was like, why is Jim mad? Gosh, he's so over-exaggerating this. It was only $300. My daddy owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. Oh, but in that secret place, he gives us loving guidance. And he says, Jennifer, maybe you shouldn't spend $300 on your 2 outfits right before Christmas, or maybe not ever until you've talked to your husband about it. That's always a good plan. Talk to your husband. But it's something he shares with us in private. It's something he shares with us in our intimate times with him. Think about the prophets that we've been studying. Think about Zechariah, those visions he had in the night. Those are the times of intimacy that I'm referring to. How did Esther do what she did? 1 John 4:18 and 19 says that perfect love expels all fears. If we are afraid, it's for the punishment, and this shows that we've not fully experienced his perfect love. So when I'm in a place where I'm afraid, When I'm in a place where I'm experiencing fear about how a situation's going to work out, or fear about whether I'm going to make the team or whatever it is, and it's just because I haven't experienced his perfect love in that area. It just means I want to go back to that time of intimacy with him, and I just want to say, okay, Lord, in this time, I want you to help me expel this, because, Lord, it says your love will expel the fear. I don't even have to try to make the fear go away. And I have to believe that Esther got this. I have to believe that Mordecai got this. I have to believe that in those night seasons, in those times when she was preparing to go before the king, and even after she went to the king, I have to believe that she understood that she could say, Lord, your love has to get rid of this fear. Because there's not enough working it up inside of you. I think Esther was probably around 14. There's not enough working it up inside of you to expel the fear of going before a crazy king. There's just not. It had to be God. But she was godly in the midst of godlessness, just as we are called to do. It's only after we personally experience his love that we free ourselves from the fear of him ever hurting us. You know, we live a lot of times afraid of what God's going to do, afraid where he's going to take us. I can remember being scared to death that he was going to call me to be a missionary. And it was going to be to Africa. And to me, I was probably in middle school. To me, I was so afraid of that. I was so afraid, Lord, you're going to make me go to Africa. And all of a sudden one day I realized that one of my friends wanted to be a missionary and go to Africa. And I was like, what is wrong with you? Why do you want to go to Africa? And then I began to realize, you know what? He puts gifts and talents and desires. Now, I'm sure Esther didn't ever want to go and be in the king's harem. But I will tell you, you can trust him. You can trust him just as Esther did, because we don't have situations that are extreme as hers. We can trust him in our situations. We can trust him to know that his love for us is true. And understanding that he loves us is a prerequisite for us ever trusting him. You know what? I don't trust people that I don't know love me. I just don't. I mean, I wish I did. It doesn't mean I think bad things of people. It just means until I know that you love me, I'm not going to trust and believe that what you're saying is really for my best. I may still take your advice because I really like hearing what everybody has to say, but I'm not going to necessarily always believe it. But we know that faith works by love. We can only fully trust the one whose character and whose promises, and through our own personal involvement with, that we know he has no intent to hurt us. Can you imagine how Esther felt? Can you imagine when she got to that place where she could say, I know God's not trying to hurt me. He's not abandoned me. He's not left me alone. And in the moment that she became queen, in the moment when, you know, the king is like, I like her a lot, she still didn't know where this was going to end. She still just knew, now I'm queen. You know, now I've been declared his favorite. Great, that means I spend more time with him. Maybe she liked him, maybe she didn't. But I think she understood the secret place. She understood that the way of life of trusting him to walk us through and lead us through situations is not just a theory or a pipe dream, that it's an actual way that we can live life. It's not just information. It's a real place where we can live moment by moment, where just like Esther, our faith finds its full expression, and involvement becomes relationship. You know, instead of just being involved with God or just being involved in church, all of a sudden it's about relationship. It's about knowing his character. It's about trusting him in the midst of terrible situations that happen for many, many different reasons. But knowing that we can choose to walk this out in a godly way. I can choose to be the only person in a situation walking in integrity. Just like the son, or the one that became the son in the story I opened with. He could have chosen to do what the other 9 boys did, but instead, he chose to walk it out in integrity. Esther did the same. Why did she rise to the top with all of the other women? Why did she rise to the top with Haggai, the eunuch who was preparing them? Why did she rise to the top with King Xerxes? Because she lived life in a way of integrity. and in a way of understanding the secret place. And therefore, her godliness, she never probably had to use the word God. Because remember, Mordecai told her, don't tell him that you're Jewish. Don't tell him about your background. So she couldn't talk like we talk. Like we talk about God in a way with one another. She couldn't do that. Yet the way she lived life just set her apart. I want to be that kind of person. I want to be the kind of person that people don't have to hear me say God. They don't have to see me up here talking. They don't have to know I go to community Bible study. But they say Jennifer lives life in a way of integrity, a way where she's kind to people, a way where she values people where they are, a way where she shows love in situations where love isn't deserved, where she gives forgiveness where forgiveness hasn't been asked for. That's the kind of person I want to be, just like Esther, because I believe that these were the things that would be said about her. And, you know, when you talk about in your groups the things that God did to make this all work, it's going to be amazing. But will you choose today to dwell in the secret place of the Most High so that you can live godly in ungodly situations? Let's pray. Lord, you're good. Thank you. Thank you for how you lead us. Thank you for how you guide us, Father. Thank you. Thank you for the story of Esther that shows me how I can walk life out in a way that declares you are King. Lord, as we go into this Christmas season, I pray for each of these families that are represented here that, Lord, they would celebrate you in a way like never before. And Father, I pray for the time in our groups today that it would be good and rich and just filled with the way that you show yourself strong in every situation. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, guys, you are about to get to go to your groups. Core leaders, go ahead and pray over the food before you leave your groups. That way, when you come in, it's just the getting in line. And guys, I hope you enjoy studying Esther 1 and 2. Thanks. Have a great time.